much, Riddhi and Mridini. And so thank you, Mridini. Thank you, Riddhi. Thank you, Dhruti. And of course, a very big thank you to Dr. Mugdha Karnik and to all of you all, of course, who have come to join us. So today's lecture is on Mandagora, aka Mandad Kuda. So the story is, of course, a story of many visits and many different explorations, culminating in excavations, and the data from those excavations then being visited by various different people. So let me start off by thanking a large number of people and agencies who've been involved in this. This was an excavation conducted by the India Study Center Trust. It was our first excavation. We conducted it jointly with the Center for Extramural Studies, University of Mumbai, but we were the primary partners. We got permission, of course, from the Archaeological Survey of India for this, and we are very, very grateful to the ASI for granting us permission to carry out these excavations. We also teamed up with Dr. Tejas Garge and the State Department of Archaeology, and we are very, very grateful to them too. And of course, Dr. Abhijit Dandekar of the Deccan College was in charge of all of our ceramics and is responsible for giving us some amazing breakthroughs. This said, there were a large number of others who participated in this. People who've been with me in the field again and again, people who gave us vehicles to use in the field, people who helped us and encouraged us to work there. My good friend, Ernest Emmanuel Meyer, who was so excited about working in this field that he got us all worked up to carry out these excavations. Rahul Oka from Duke University, USA, who actually sent down 2 of his students to work with us. All of my students who worked with me and ex-students who came and worked with me, so many to mention. Of course, my absolute pillar of strength in the field, and strong right hand, if you want to call him that, Siddharth Kale, aka Sidhu, and so many more, Harshada Virkud, and so many of my students, just too many to mention here, so you all will all forgive me for not mentioning all of you all. And of course, very ably supported, sadly could not come for the excavations, Ramesh Gauri Raghavan, but who was there on the way to these excavations. So without much more ado, we'll launch into today's session, as I told you. Not very far from some of the choicest hotspots and tourist locations in coastal Maharashtra are a series of very, very interesting Buddhist rock-cut caves. Since they are about 5 hours away from Bombay, these caves are perhaps the least visited caves on the coast around the city of Mumbai. Once upon a time, there was a bustling Indo-Roman port or emporium over here next to these caves, and these caves have been carved, of course, into the low basalt hills, part of the Deccan Trap, overlooking the Mandad arm of the Rajpuri Khadi. They're about 129 kilometers south of Mumbai and very close to the famous Murud Janjira Fort in the Raigad District, which is at the mouth. So the Janjira Fort is at the mouth of the Rajpuri Creek, and the Mandad arm is where we have this amazing site, referred to as Mandagora by Roman traders and Mandava originally by the local ruling dynasty, the Mahabhojas. This port finds multiple mentions in the Geographia of Claudius Ptolemy and also mentioned in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea or the Periplus Mare Erythraeum between the mid-1st to the 2nd centuries AD. So from the 3rd century BC to the 2nd century AD, between the rise and fall of the Mauryas and the rise of the Satavahanas of the Deccan, there were a large number of small kingdoms and dynasties that were scattered across western and southern Maharashtra. To name just a few, the Maharathis, the Mahabhojas, the Karnabhojas, the Mahasenapatis, the Kumaras, the Kuras, and many, many others, including the Mahatalwaras and others. This story is the story of the Mahabhojas of Mandava. They ruled a small coastal kingdom in what is today the Raigad district of Maharashtra, and they ruled this from the capital city, Mandava, today identified with the small, sleepy ex-fishing village, as I call it, of Mandad. Surprisingly, there's like all the other small kingdoms that existed in Maharashtra during this period is a story that is known to very, very few experts in this field and to very, very few others. Most people have no clue who they are. Had it not been for their enormous patronage to Buddhism and the rock-cut caves of the Kuda complex, we would have probably overlooked them in history. Now, the Kuda caves are a series of lesser caves, Buddhist caves, rock-cut caves carved out of a hill that overlooks the villages of Kuda and Mandad on the Rajpuri Creek. Now, this lesser itself is a bad name. There are a large number of caves in 2 tiers, and there are more than 31 different inscriptions in these caves belonging to 2 very, very clear periods. The first of them, first set, of course, is in Prakrut and in the beautiful Brahmi script of the 2nd century, 1st century AD onwards. The second are in Sanskrit and belong to a later period after the 4th century AD, perhaps the 5th, 6th century AD. And they tell a fascinating story of a very, very interesting set of caves. The reason that these caves are called lesser caves is because these caves do not have large barrel vaulted roofs and Chaitya window entrances, and therefore these are relegated to the term lesser, which is in many ways a very, very bad idea. Now, this is the map of the west coast of India. This is Supara or Suparaka. This is Kalyan or Kalyana. This is, of course, Mumbai, which was almost a nobody at that time. This is Chaul or Semila. And this is Mandad Kuda or Mandagora. So here you have the complex of the creek itself. This is the Janjira fort over here. And this is the Janjira fort. And you have this arm
Your
of the
cursor
creek
is
known
not
as
working,
Mandad arm.
Kush.
Okay. So you can see the Mandad arm of the creek where Mandad is placed. And you have the Kuda Caves and you have Kuda itself. So this is a map built on the basis of the Periplus Mare Erythrium, and it tells us, a very, very interesting story of a fascinating period when trade was directed down the Arabian Gulf, or the Red Sea as we know it, into the Erythraean Sea or the Arabian Sea as we call it today, and where ships coming out of the Egyptian end of this place reached out to India and to parts, of course, in Ethiopia, Somalia, and down all the way to Kenya. And the trade from China, which had been blocked off by the Parthians, was now rerouted through the ports of India. We know of a large number, a whole list of ports. So if you look at the blow up on the right-hand side, you have the great port of Barigaza on the top and the port of Muziris at the bottom. Now, these are the 2 greatest emporiums of this phase. And Barigaza is Bharuch. Muziris, we believe, is the village of Pattanam, where excavations have been carried on for the last 10 years by a number of different agencies. South of Barigaza are the ports of Kamoni, which is basically Kamraj or modern-day Surat. Then you have, of course, the ports of Supala or Suparaka, which is Supara, Kalyana or Kalyan, Semila or Chaul. You have Mandagora, which we have identified with Mandad, Palepepne, Melizigara, Byzantium, Togarium, Oronospos, Nora, Tindis, and then Muziris. Now, while Supara, Kalyana, and Semila have all been identified earlier, there was always a large amount of discrepancy about the identity of Mandagora, and questions were raised as to why Mandagora was called what it was. In 55 AD, the Greeks conquered the whole of, Egypt. Alexandria fell to the Greeks, to the Romans, and the Romans now had access to the Red Sea for the first time. Prior to this, the Red Sea was a Greco-Egyptian sea controlled by the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled over Egypt, Sinai, and parts of West Asia. It was originally a Greco-Egyptian trade that came to India as early as the 2nd century BC, and we know that Eudoxus or Cyzicus made the first journey somewhere around 120 BC. Something, once again, very, very few of us are cognizant with unless we are working in this field. From the great port of Muscle Harbour or Myos Hormos and the port of Berenike, tons and tons of goods had been flowing out, up and down the Red Sea, and then ultimately down to the west coast of India, and of course to the coast of the southern coast of Pakistan and Iran, to the Oman coast, and into the Persian Gulf. For a brief period of time, the port of Spasinu-Charax in Persia was controlled by the Romans, and we actually have eyewitness records of the Roman emperor standing and overseeing the ships from India that were clustered in his docks. So unlike most people who believe that there were just foreign ships that came to India and the Indians were just sitting tight waiting and hoping people would come here, this is not the case. Indian traders were very, very cognizant. And why do we know this? We know this because Eudoxus of Cyzicus tells us of an Indian shipwrecked sailor who was found at the mouth of the Red Sea and who was then brought to the pharaoh, and he promised to show the Ptolemaids a way to India. So the way to India was opened up by an Indian and not by Romans or by Greeks, as we are somewhat misinformed by our texts or our current textbooks. So the story, as far as we are concerned, starts in about 1854, when a very interesting gentleman by the name of Reverend J. Stevenson, a huge Indian history buff, not a historian truly, published 9 inscriptions from the Buddhist rock-cut caves near the village of Kuda. So he was the man who inadvertently gave them the name Kuda Caves. And this was the first time that the world got to know about them. A lot of the work done by him was erroneous. Jacobi, a very well-known epigraphist in 1878, had to correct a lot of the mistakes made by Stevenson. But Stevenson had opened the door to the Kuda Caves. Burgess and Bhagwan Lal Indraji in 1881, in their very, very famous and seminal work, Inscriptions of the Cave Temples of Western India, reported 31 inscriptions from the complex. What is fascinating is, to this day at this complex, not a single new inscription has been found since 1881. That is how thorough the job was done by Burgess and Indraji. The Kuda Caves are an enormous data set. You know, there are 2 clear sets of inscriptions. The first, as I said, are in the Brahmi script. They record donations and the names of a very interesting local dynasty called the Mahabhojas. We have a number of kings, princesses, and queens making offerings to this monastery, and they call themselves the Mahabhojas of Mandava. Mahabhoja Mandavia. So they are the Mahabhojas who rule from Manda. So all kinds of interesting people, along with the royal family, make donations. There are ironmongers, gardeners, writers, physicians, transporters, flower sellers, and even nuns who in this early phase are making donations to these caves. The second set of inscriptions belongs to a later period. They are in the Sanskrit language and in a much later variant of the script. The Mahabhojas are also interestingly known from a few other inscriptions, not 2 other inscriptions. The first is a very weathered and very almost impossible inscription to read at the Kanheri Caves in Mumbai. There is one at the Betsa Caves, and there is probably one, we believe, at the Bhaja Caves too. So at Betsa, what is fascinating is that the Betsa region is controlled by yet another polity that we don't talk about in Maharashtra, called the Maharathis. It is the wife of one of the Maharathis who signs off as a daughter of the Mahabhoja clan. So we are talking about the Mahabhojas in marital alliance with the Maharathis, who were a slightly older and much more powerful local dynasty at this time. In fact, the great Naganika, who we know of from the inscriptions at Nasik, at Nanighat, is the daughter of a Maharathi. So just to give you an idea of how important these local dynasties were and how they made up part and parcel of the polities that made up the Satavahana era and the Satavahana Empire. Now, the Mahabhojas were a very, very localized dynasty. Uh, deep inside the Rajpuri Creek, they perhaps controlled the entire creek to its mouth. They flourished in this region of the Middle Konkan, somewhere between the 2nd century BC and the 2nd century AD. We're not very sure when. We do know that it is in the 1st/2nd century AD that the caves are built, and therefore they were definitely a very powerful dynasty making donations, and that these caves were made here very, very clearly points out to us that they were a flourishing dynasty in charge of a flourishing port where an enormous amount of money was moving to and fro and trade and goods and so on and so forth. And this merited the building of this kind of a monastery at this location. So at some point of time, they seem to have gone from being an independent local state to Satavahana vassals of the early Satavahanas. They seem to have changed sides to the Kshatrapas during the times of Nahapana, and finally having gone back after Nahapana was defeated by Gautamiputra Satakarni. We know this because we have a few lead coins of the Mahabhojas, and interestingly, on these lead coins, we see the symbols of Nahapana. And this leads numismatists like Dr. Shailendra Bhandare to come to the conclusion that these Nahapana symbols on the reverse are very, very clear signs that they belong to a confederation or a hegemony, the top of which are the Kshatrapas. What is very, very interesting about the Kuda inscriptions is that unlike most other inscriptions, at almost all the sites in India, and I say India very specifically because there are sites in Sri Lanka which have ginormous inscriptions as in the size of individual alphabets. There are very, very large, very clear, very deeply cut alphabets at Kuda, and the Center for Extramural Studies and now the India Study Center regularly takes camps at the Kuda Caves when we teach our students the Brahmi script, because it's one of the easiest places to read. Paleographically, the Brahmi belongs to the 1st century AD. Some people argue that it's probably the very late 1st century AD, perhaps the very early 2nd century AD. I'm not going to quibble about it. This is the main cave at Kuda. It once had 2 elephants that flanked it. You see the remnants of one elephant here. The other elephant's head is over here. You have the Vedika railing over here. There is a small antechamber, and you can see the windows and the doorway behind. And through this is a large square room, followed by a beautiful square chamber in which there is a absolutely gorgeous stupa. This, of course, is Ernest Emmanuel Maya over here on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is Siddharth Kale. So this is a face-on view of the caves. You can see the remnants of one of the elephants over here. You can see the other elephant on this side. The cave has remained quite intact, but a considerable bit of the outside has been damaged through the years due to weathering. So this is a close-up of our friend, the elephant. You can see the remnants of plaster. So at one time, the elephant would have been completely plastered over. These are later intrusive images that belong to the period after the 4th century AD. On the inside, flanking the chamber in which we have the stupa, so flanking the main Garbhagriha of the Chaityagraha, we have donor couples in the style of the 1st century BC AD that you see on the right-hand side over here. These, of course, as I said, are some of the intrusive images that we get over there, which belong to a much later period. And it's very obvious from the kind of images and the size of images, the quality of images, that they belong to the Mahayana phase, and they are much later. You can see the originally Hinayana period sculptures over here on this side. This is the kind of inscription that we get over there. And as you can see, you can very, very clearly read every single character in these inscriptions at Kuda. These are some of the other caves and the water cisterns. So here you have a Panyapoi. This one carries water almost throughout the year, even today. And in times of emergencies, I've seen villagers coming up all the way here to wash their clothes and bathe their children because there's very little water available to them and only drinking water comes to them thanks to the government. So these are still, well, 2000 years or so later, very, very much in use and very, very much part of the hydraulic landscape. You have a number of viharas scattered and you have another tier of caves on the top. There is also another small Chaityagraha at the joint, as I call it, between the lower and upper tiers. Amongst the various different inscriptions that we have, one of the very interesting things is there is some kind of a logogram or some kind of chinna in front of all of these inscriptions. You have swastikas and you have various different lion facing forward and so on and so forth. But the most fascinating is this one that you see over here on the left-hand side. This is from Kuda Cave number 11. It is sadly broken. I mean, yeah, it absolutely kills me that perhaps the most important inscription here is damaged. Only the words Mahabhoja Ba Likaya, we believe, and the second line Mandavya E something or the other has survived. But this is enough to tell us that there is a donation being made by a Mandava princess or a Mandava daughter. The logograph at the beginning is that of a hippocampus. So a hippocampus, hippo is horse, campus is fish. A hippocampus is a mythical Mediterranean beast coming to us from the Greek and the Roman legends. And this is half horse, half fish. The only other hippocampuses of this period that we see from Mathura, from the famous Jain stupa at the Kankali Tila, which is really, really far away from here. We believe that this hippocampus is the final nail in the identification of Mandad Kuda as Mandagora, because this is a very, very strong Mediterranean connection that we have with the Mahabhojas. It has also been told to us, well, in a personal communication, that there is a lead coin of the Mahabhojas with a hippocampus on its negative side. But sadly, since that is an unpublished coin, we cannot use that as proof at this point. This is the village of Kuda, and on the hill over here, we have the Kuda Caves. Okay. This is the village of Mandava. Just to give you an idea about the kind of situation that we're looking at. This is all barren rock over here, and more barren rock over here, and barren rock. So there's very, very small area of land which can be occupied. This is all fields over here. This is the modern village of Mandad. There is a Hindu side and a Muslim side, and the Muslim side is a small Jama Masjid right here. This is a small, almost absolutely circular island called Little Jui, or Lahan Jui or Nani Jui. This, we believe, was the ancient harbour site over here, which has since been silted over. And then at some point, a small dam was built, and the inside area was turned into very, very rich rice fields. Then, due to problems in the village, this dam was not maintained. The dam sluice gates are broken, and this is a very, very sticky mess today. There is also the size of a second harbour, perhaps over here, and perhaps even a third mooring or harbour over here with a little bit of land around it. There are two rock-cut cisterns at this point, which also make us believe that perhaps we are looking at a harbour location over here also. But all of this and this entire area over here has been repurposed for prawn farming, as a result of which there is absolutely nothing left for us in the sense of archaeological material, as it has all been dumped in the creation of these ponds. Explorations carried out at the caves led us to believe that the site was, thanks to the hippocampus, the location of the Mandad Kuda or Mandagora site. Mr. Ramesh Kauri Raghavan, myself, Priya Mitra, uh, Ernest Emmanuel Meyer, and Siddharth Kale, then published this. And on the basis, on the strength of the publication, we applied for permission to carry out excavations. We were granted permission to carry out excavations, and in the month of May in 2019, we carried out small-scale test excavations at the site of Mandad. The island is surprisingly privately owned, and we did not get permission to work on it or to excavate on it. This is, of course, as I said, the proposed harbour that we're looking at here. This is where we had found a few scattered potsherds in this area, and we decided to then concentrate on this area where we had found what looked like the handle of an amphora. So we put our small trench, 2 meter by 2 meter trench TT1 over here. Subsequent to that, we put a small trench here called TT2, only to realize that there was absolutely about 5 meters of washed pottery on 5 centimeters of washed pottery on the top. And then it was all fill material, and that this was originally part of the harbour itself. We then moved to TT3, which was up the slope closer to the mosque, and Mr. Dandekar, who owned the empty plot, was kind enough to give us permission to excavate over here, and with his permission, we put in a large trench. TT1 gave us some amazing historical data. TT3, on the other hand, gave us some amazing early medieval data. So it was very clear that the site had been used at least twice as a port site, once in the early historical period and then in the early medieval period, as was very, very clear from a small amount of blue on white Ming porcelain that we gathered from the surface of the area and from the upper horizons at TT3. So this is trial trench 1 that we took. If you look at the section clearly, you will notice that there are 2 layers under which there is a layer of stones. The local men working with us, young men working with us, told us that everywhere under their fields, at a depth of about 40 to 60 centimeters, they get this layer of stones, this bedding layer of stones, which appears to be some kind of an abandonment phase. And after which, a lot of stones have moved down from the hillside and then have been subsequently covered in silt and mud. Below this, we got very, very ceramic rich horizons. In the upper layers, we had a very small smattering of early medieval pottery, a few plastic beads, and a couple of glass bangle fragments of a very modern kind. Under the stone horizon, we began to get very, very interesting early historic ceramics. You can see the layers over there. It looks like the peripheral area of a site, and there are multiple micro layers, thin micro layers that you can see in the section over there, slanting towards the left. And there are very, very clearly 3 layers present. The bottommost layer, of course, is the natural clay, or what we archaeologists call the virgin soil, in which we have absolutely 0 artifacts. So this is TT3 on the other hand, and you can see how different the soil over here is as compared to TT1 over here. The soil over here is a slightly sticky, clayey, sandy soil, and we have once again 4 very, very clear layers. There's the upper horizon, or the humus as we call it, which is where the plant material and the present modern day activity zone is. We even found a battered modern wristwatch from that horizon, under which from layer 2 onwards, you start getting a very stratified early medieval deposit belonging to the 15th, 16th centuries AD. Going down, we believe we get material all the way to the 12th century AD. And right at the base, we have a small scattering of about 10 centimeters or so of early historic pottery before we hit the natural soil. So this is the section in TT3. This is just a field photograph of some of the ceramics that we have from the site, and the ceramics are very, very interesting. We have the black and red ware that you see in the second line and on the left-hand side in the third line from the top. We also have these beautiful ink pot lids that you see in the top row on the left and in the center, which we believe are influenced by the Kushana ceramics of the 1st, 2nd century AD. The black and red pottery is often called the Satavahana pottery. It is the early historical pottery of the Deccan, and sadly, no proper work has been done on it whatsoever. Nobody has tried to understand the different nuances of black and red ware to try and understand exactly when it starts in the historical period, when it ends, and what transformations it goes through. What was most fascinating to us was that below that level of stones, we got a beautiful deposit of early historic material. Roughly in the center of that deposit, as we were halfway down, we got this one fragment of Northern Black Polished Ware. I was completely gobsmacked when we found it. This is not what we had set out to find. We were looking for a site that belonged to the 1st, 2nd centuries AD. This is a ceramic that does not extend beyond the 2nd century AD. In fact, it is a very well-known ceramic from the 6th, 7th to the 3rd centuries BC, and very, very few shards of it are known from the 2nd century BC. What the presence of this one very, very simple-looking potsherd does at this site, and this is the importance of meticulous archaeology, one single potsherd like this firmly places the site of Mandad in at least the 2nd century BC. So we have a large number of beautiful black and red ware, and Dr. Abhijit Dandekar and his team have been doing some very fascinating work on this material, and have been sitting and studying our ceramics. And we have the rim sherds and the pottery being drawn and organized for a detailed ceramic report that we hope to have in our hands by the end of this year. So this is the Satavahana ceramic, as it's often called, and we firmly believe that we will have to rewrite this label of Satavahana ceramic and instead look at the black and red ware as the earliest tableware of Maharashtra and the Deccan, dating back to at least the 3rd century BC, if not slightly earlier. Along with this, we found some very, very interesting stray sherds. This is a surface find very close to where we took TT1. This potsherd was found by Siddharth Kale. It's a beautiful molded piece of pottery. Molded pottery is not usually an Indian thing till the Gupta era. But molded pottery is incredibly common in Greece and Rome, and we have large amounts of pottery called Megarian ware. And Thomson Publishing in 1934 clearly has some material that is very, very similar to what we have at Mandad. And he places it very, very firmly in the early Indo-Roman period of roughly the 1st century AD. And we definitely need to do more work vis-a-vis this kind of ceramic. This is, of course, on the right-hand side, a complete Megarian ware pot from Greece, just to show you what Megarian ware actually looks like. This is not what we have found. Okay, on the right-hand side, what we have found is on the left-hand side, and it is definitely an imitation of this kind of ceramic. What completely threw us after this, I mean, it was bad enough that we had a sherd of Northern Black Polished Ware. It could have purely come as, you know, some oddity in trade and a one-off thing. What we found was this amazing rim in coarse red ware of what we call the pear-shaped pot. Now, we subsequently have an entire list of pots with similar rims, an evolution of these rims, etc. At a depth of about 1 meter, we got these coarse redware sherds in rim shapes that are completely reminiscent of the Mauryan redwares of the Ganga Yamuna Doab and datable to the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. This completely blew our minds. While tablewares can travel long distances as the individual belongings of people, coarse wares do not travel long distances. Number one, because they are coarse wares. Number two, because they are comparatively fragile. The only way we believe these wares could have come all the way to Mandad is by sea, and the only way these wares could have come by sea is from the mouth of the Ganges. These pear-shaped pots are seen at Balathal in Rajasthan, at Nagari in Rajasthan, at Timberwa in Gujarat, at Aura, at Kakreta, at Ujjain in Madhya Pradesh, at Ahichhatra, Bita, Kosambi, Kumrahar, Pataliputra, Rajghat, Sonk, Sonpur, Vaishali, all the main sites of the Mauryan period. Tilora Court, which is identified as Kapilavastu by the Nepalese, where the Buddha was born, Ropar in Punjab, Takshashila in Pakistan, Nasik and Prakash in Maharashtra, all of these. And all of this is published material, so you don't have to, start wondering about where you can find this. All these sites, the pear-shaped pots, are seen in strata datable from the 6th century BC to the 2nd century BC. Nowhere after this period do we see the pear-shaped pots, and their presence at Mandad is a fascinating window into a hitherto completely unknown and unrepresented era in the Raigad District in Maharashtra on the west coast. So the data from the Kuda Caves clearly tells us from the inscriptions that a family of Mahabhojas from Mandava, i.e. Mandad, which is the capital city of a small Janapada in the greater Deccan region, ruled a port site. The Mahabhojas are mentioned at Bhaja, Bidsa, and Karle caves. A very wealthy and powerful family, definitely making marriage alliances with other powerful families. And what is more obvious is that the Ganga Valley NBP and the pear-shaped pots, and surprisingly, another small fragment of what we call the Sri Lankan Tissa Maharama grey ware, datable to the 3rd century BC at Tissa Maharama in Sri Lanka, which was also found alongside the Northern Black Polished Ware, very, very clearly tell us that there were massive coastal connections with Mandad as early as the 2nd, 3rd centuries BC, if not even perhaps earlier. So from the 3rd century BC to the 2nd century AD, we know there are a lot of smaller kingdoms in the Deccan. These dynasties preceded the Satavahanas, were allies of the Kshatripas, and then were ultimately swallowed up in the later or the imperial Satavahana period. The Marathi connection, of course, is very clear. At Manighat, we are told that Naganika, the wife of Satakarni I, was the daughter of a Maharathi, and we actually have that in that beautiful statue gallery, which is lost to us. The connections between the Maharathis and the Mahabhojas are also clearly seen at the Bedsa cave inscriptions, where the Maharathi queen signs off as the daughter of the Mahabhojas. The very clear association of the Mahabhojas with Mandad, aka Mandava, is also seen in the Kuda cave inscriptions, as I've told you before. And we're very thankful to the royal patronage of Buddhism. Otherwise, we would have probably never figured out who this dynasty were and where they ruled. The apabhramsha of Mandava Kura or Mandava Kuda in Prakrit to Mandagora in Greek is very, very obvious, especially when coupled with the hippocampus, the amphorae, and the fact that there is a port site with most definitely trade being carried out with the Western world and definitely on the western coast of India. The Rajpuri Creek is the next creek after the Vaitarna, where we have massive Indo-Roman archaeological sites at Semila or Chaul. And we know that definitely there is a lot of work being done here. The Deccan College with Gokte and Dandekar have already excavated there and found amphorae fragments and other material belonging to the so-called Indo-Roman era trade. We can now, with very, very quiet confidence, say that there is a brand new port site with connections to this Indo-Roman trading period. A port going back at least 300 years prior to that Indo-Roman trading period, that heyday of the 2nd to the 4th century AD. We're going back at least 300 years from there. And that there was a continuity of use in the 15th and 17th centuries of the medieval era. And further excavations will tell us much, much more about the site. This is, of course, lunch break and Dr. Meyer refusing to leave the site and taking a quick snooze under the only tree that exists over there. These are our two students, Charlie and Philip, who came down all the way from the United States to work at the site and really cheered us all up. Though, of course, Charlie also got ill and had to be hospitalized per man due to a sunstroke. On the left-hand side, you have none other than Siddharth Kale, carefully studying the stratigraphy of the excavations at TT1. On the right-hand side, my colleague, my friend, the crazy madman that we all know as Ramesh Gauri Raghavan. The two women, perhaps very quietly and solidly responsible for the backbone of this project. On the left, my wife Ria, who also ran camp and kitchen at Mandad. On the right, Dr. Mugdha Karnik, who assured us that she would be right behind us and help us with materials, equipment, permissions, and in confidence building measures with the local peoples. So this was a very, very large scale, small scale excavation, where large scale is the number of people who were involved in it. Small scale, of course, is the area that we excavated. We had a small budget and we had to do what we could with that. As I like to say, at all preliminary excavation reportings, picture abhi baki hai. To put it in a nutshell, the excavations at Mandad have completely changed the history of the port sites of the west coast of India. Till this point, the only port site we believed where there was a Mauryan connection was the site of Sopara. South of Sopara, there was supposedly nothing Mauryan. Now, 130 kilometers south of Sopara, we have evidence for a Mauryan era port site. We also now have evidence, tentative though it might be, that this port site was carrying out trade with Sri Lanka, and that this port site had people coming to it all the way from the other side of India, from the port known as Gangaride or Ganges at the mouth of the Ganga. So we know that Mauryan ships were coming out of the mouth of the Ganges and coming down the coast. We definitely know that there was an enormous amount of trade in the Mauryan period with Sri Lanka. There is absolutely no doubt about it. We know that Ashoka Maurya's son takes Buddhism down to Sri Lanka. He then calls his sister Sanghamitta Tissa and asks her to bring down the Tripitakas and a sapling from the Bodhi tree, which, by the way, still stands to this very day in Sri Lanka. And Sanghamitta Tissa, of course, is greatly venerated for bringing down the Tripitakas to Sri Lanka and helping Sri Lanka embrace Buddhism. We have the Tissa Maharama remains from the 3rd century BC, and we have the Tissa Maharama grey ware at Mandad also, along with the Northern Black Polished Ware and the large quantities of pear-shaped pot rims and fragments of coarse ware. Now, all of this tells us that there was a very, very vibrant trade in the Bay of Bengal and the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. So the Indian Ocean littoral of South Asia for sure was heavily occupied in trade from the 3rd century BC and perhaps even earlier. There is still so much more work to do in this field. This work would not be possible without all those people who contributed their time, their money, their effort. We have other materials that we are studying from the site. We have 2 pairs of what we believe are ear plugs or large ear discs made out of fish bone. We also have a fragment of a blue glass bead, which has also been found at the site of, it's a segmented glass bead where multiple beads are kind of joined together like to make up a segmented bead. So there are 2 beads joined together in blue glass, which is a very common Roman era colored glass. We have a similar example from the site of Chaul, which has been excavated by Gupta Dandekar. So In total, we are looking at some fascinating remains over here at Mandad. And suddenly Mandad has a harbour in which there may even be a Roman era shipwreck, because in the Roman period, we know from the ports of the Mediterranean that ships very often capsized while being loaded and unloaded, and then half a ship, the half that would be sunk in its side into the silt of the port, very often survives absolutely intact, with even the goods inside it intact to a certain degree, especially if they're amphorae and things like that. To top it off, we have from the surface of the island, while carrying out surface explorations, the foot of an amphora. It looks like it is what we call uh, an amphora not from the main Mediterranean region itself, which again makes it very interesting. And it's very worn out. We hope to continue the excavations in the next archaeological season, for which we would like to ask all of you all to help us find funds to carry out this work, because the excavations and the post-excavation work do cost quite a bit of money. So whilst we have most of the equipment currently, we would have to bring in LiDAR and scanners to scan the port area for any sites or any shipwrecks in it. We would also have to conduct a number of excavations at the site itself, and all of this will cost money. So we do make an appeal to you to consider helping out the India Study Center Trust and in helping us bring some funds for this project. You can either give it to us directly to the trust, or you can earmark it especially to the project and get back to us and get in touch with us via @INSTUCEN at uh, uh, Instagram. There are also INSTUCEN. I'll ask my colleagues to put up the email address on the YouTube page, so you will get that also. And we'll be very happy to take any questions from any of you all about today's talk, or anything that you want to know about what the School of Archaeology does. Thank you very much. Picture abhi baki hai. Please put up your hands, and I'll be very, very happy to take your questions. Or you can type them out in the chat. Please make the chat open to all. Riddhi and Dhruti.
Yes, sir.
Questions, ladies and gentlemen. Please put your hands up, unmute yourself, and put on your cameras. One would love to see your faces. Dhruti, please allow people to unmute and put their cameras on.
Yes, sir.
Ah, I see Siddharth over here. Siddharth is my strong right hand in the field. So yes, as Acharya, such potsherds are found in Bengal and in Bihar on the banks of the Ganga. And we have them from Odisha also. So we know that this kind of material was traveling down the Ganges during this period. Malti, the next phase of excavation should take place, if all works out, in 2025 May, April, May. Good evening, sir. Gaurangi, what is the role of ASI in the sense of some collaboration? At the moment, the excavations are privately funded. We have not approached the ASI for funding. We will do so in the next tranche, now that we have something worth asking them for, now that we have proven the worth of the site. The Archaeological Survey of India is the apex body governing archaeology in India, and you cannot carry out any excavations anywhere without their express permission. So we are very, very grateful to them for having granted this permission to us. and for making us the custodians of the material that has been excavated from the site. So the material that is excavated from the site is technically the ownership of the government of India and the people of India. And we are merely the temporary custodians of this material. Again, thanks in no large part to the Archaeological Survey of India itself. So very, very grateful to the Archaeological Survey of India and the State Department for their NOC and for helping us and getting the permissions, so on and so forth. Oishi says, what is the profile of the red ware pot, which you said belongs to the Kushana period? It is, Oishi, what we call the ink pot lid. And I'll be very happy to share an image with you subsequently. We have published this and I will be putting up the article on my academia.edu profile. Just look for Kurush Dalal at academia.edu. And we have just published the Mandad report in a beautiful publication on ports of the west coast of India. And the preliminary report is therefore now published and in the common domain. And like I said, I will share a PDF with you all. And those of you all who are on the WhatsApp group, we will put the PDF over there also. So you're free to peruse it. And this thing, sadly, we did not get any miniature terracotta stupas, but the size of the excavations, Oishi, was quite small. 2 meter by 2 meter trench in the early historic zone. The Kuda inscriptions have the names of a large number of these kings, Sukada. So many of these kings are very, very specifically mentioned. And as I said, we have their names. We have the names of their queens also. We have, in some cases, the names of their other family members. So, yes, quite a lot of this is available to us. Are there any other questions? Oishi says, sir, do you think the NBP shed was in the primary context? Yes, most definitely, because it's a very clearly stratified context. And along with it is the Tissa grey ware, which is dated to the 3rd century BC at Tissa. So, in fact, it's even more contextual this way than any other way. And alongside it, we have the pear-shaped pots, which we find alongside the Northern Black Polished Ware in the Ganga Valley. There are examples of very late discoveries of early Northern Black Polished Ware. From Andhra Pradesh, we have a Northern Black Polished Ware bowl, which was broken and repaired with copper rivets, which has been found inside a stupa belonging to the 2nd century AD. But this is obviously a very important relic from a much earlier period that was carried over at a very important religious center and a very important religious relic. In fact, there is even certain amount of speculation that it might have been the begging bowl of the Buddha itself. Yes, this site would be contemporary to the early phase at Telara. Yes. Yes, we will definitely be looking at Yun Sang's records. And though Yun Sang did find his way along the coast, from the maps that we have, he seems to have cut across the Deccan north of Mandagora, sadly. And in the 7th century AD, we have absolutely zero evidence of occupation at Mandad so far. I mean, who knows? We might just find something relevant at some point and it could be a complete hallelujah moment. But at this point, no Ogle board, we have absolutely no evidence of bricks so far. There are a few tiny brick bats, so rolled pieces of brick, but there are no intact bricks at all from anywhere here. Anybody else? Are there any questions on YouTube, Riddhi?
Yes, sir. There are two questions. I'll just read them out.
Hello, sir. Could
So,
I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Hello, I'm Shreya. I visited the Kuda Cave this year. I'm just curious, what kind of chronological phases are the other caves in? I think there are three sets. They're in two tiers, but there's a set of four of them on the right hand side. So, what
So
phases were
there are
they?
actually three tiers. So there
Three
is
tiers.
one tier, there is a
The
second tier,
second
and there is a
and the
third
third.
tier.
Right,
And
right.
the first cave of the second tier over here actually is at the junction where you go up to the third tier. So if you
Yes,
look at it that way, there are three tiers.
right.
Sadly, nobody goes right. So
Yes, sir.
those
Right.
caves on the right hand side are, well, almost look completely abandoned even today. And this is a very sad thing. There is also one extra cave,
So, is
which
it
is
at
at
the
a
top?
lower level.
Oh,
No, it's
okay.
at a lower level slightly, and it's impossible to get to from the top. You can only get to it from the bottom. And
Right.
we actually did part of our explorations there. And much to our, well, sadness, or whatever you'd like to call it, guess what? There is nothing in that cave whatsoever that can help us in any way, uh,
Right.
which is, again, quite painful. One would have hoped that there was something, maybe a little lost inscription. I think it's just an unfinished, simple, plain cave. And why it is over there and why it is never mentioned, even though it can be seen from Kuda village, is something that I have never understood. In
Right, sir.
fact, I have visited Kuda caves at least a dozen times, Shreya, and I had never seen that cave. And it's
Wow.
only when we actually set up camp over there, we started carrying out more intensive explorations, did we come to this, oh my God, hallelujah moment.
Right, sir. And sir, another question. I think one of the,
Please.
I don't remember, cave number 10 or 11, maybe it has this gorgeous octagonal pillars with an inverted lotus, I think. Why
That is
don't we,
the thing is.
yes, so why don't we see more of those around? What does that signify? Like, what do we tie that to historically with,
We're talking about that beautiful pot-like, that
right, sir.
faceted
Yeah.
pot-like base that is there. No,
Yeah,
there are
one is
many
broken.
caves with some of these in the later period. You see, we have this very bad attitude of looking at the greater caves. So we do Bhaja, Karla, Betsa at the most. Even Betsa is seldom visited. And we do the Ajanta elements, we do the Pitalkhora elements, we do the Nasik caves, Pandavleni, etc. We rarely ever visit the lesser caves. So, for example, there are cave complexes that consist of only one cave. And Ambivali, for example, has one cave, and there are very similar pillars, if I remember correctly, at Ambivali also. So, in the later phases of the 2nd century to the 4th century AD era, where those caves can be directly linked to the so-called Indo-Roman trade, as opposed to the local trade that was being carried on. Questions need to be asked as to why Bhaja and Karla came up in the 3rd/very early 2nd century BC, where they did. Why did they come up? Why did the Kondivite caves come up that early? If all these caves had to be funded due to traders and trade caravans, why were these trade caravans coming from the hinterland to the coast? I mean, the only reason to come to the coast is either to pick up goods that are arriving at the coast or to drop off goods that are jumping off from the coast. So in the 3rd century BC, when the Bhaja caves are made and the Borghat route is being used, and then subsequently the Naneghat route is being used, who are the traders? So this is the critical question that Indian archaeology and ancient Indian history have never asked. And I find that very sad that this question has not been asked. I mean, why has this question not been asked? Why have we never discussed any of this before? It's, as I said, it's mind-boggling. It's a whole series of questions. So, I mean, I feel bad about it because I also studied that trade on the west coast of India started in the 1st, 2nd century AD. with the arrival of the Romans, okay, or the Roman ships. What we've realized is none of them were really Roman ships. They were all Greek speakers. This was the Greco-Roman world, and it was the remnants of the Greco-Egyptian world. And then you find out that the Greco-Egyptians were already coming here, that by 120 BC, 4 ships had made 2 trips already. Eudoxus of Cyzicus talks about it. This is beautifully recorded. So if all of this is done, what have we been waiting for? Why have we not recorded any of this? Why do we not teach any of this? What has stopped us from doing this? So I hope that answers you, Shreya. Oishi, what is this lesser cave? So lesser caves are all caves which are not magnificent apsidal chaityas. If they are not magnificent apsidal chaityas with multi-roomed viharas attached to them, with a large central hall in the vihara, then these are lesser caves. These are very, very Buddhist caves. There is absolutely no denying it. And all the intrusive images of the later period are all Buddhist images. The fact that there are 2, so-called Chaitya Grihas over there with beautiful stupas inside them also points out that they are completely Buddhist caves.
So should I read out the questions on YouTube?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So the first question is by Ramesh sir. He asks, why not a continuous horizon from early historic to medieval?
So that is a very, very good question. The only answer that I can give you just now is that 320 AD, the Satavahana Empire comes to a grinding halt. It also coincides with a primary collapse of trade coming out of the Red Sea. The Kshatrapas appear to survive mainly on overland trade with the north, and then they too fall by 405 AD to the Guptas under Chandragupta II. It's only with the rise of the Maitrakas in Gujarat that you see this kind of trade being carried out through the Persian Gulf once again. And then, of course, you have Cosmos Indicopleustes and others talking about trade with India in this, from the 5th, 6th centuries AD onwards. And this again is very much the Maitraka period. So it seems to be, again here, it seems to be that there was a very, very clear cessation of all trade. And this cessation of trade took place very, very specifically, coincidentally with the Satavahana collapse. So with the collapse of the Satavahanas, could it have been that the collapse of the Satavahanas was because of the collapse of the trade? Is a question that has been asked multiple times. And the answers are, well, not very palatable to most nationalist historians. That, what happens to Rome in 320 AD, for example? This is the question worth asking. So what is happening in Rome? The twilight of Rome, as we call it, happens at this time, right? So the question, what happened in 320 AD? So the religious freedom edict of Milan is, transcended, this, that, and the other. And you have the transfer of the ancient imperial capital from Rome to Byzantium around about the same time, around 330 AD. So obviously all hell is breaking loose in Rome. If you believe the course of events, and if you're willing to accept the simpler answer, we are responsible to a certain degree for the fall of Rome. Because you have the impassioned speeches of Marcus Aurelius begging the people of Rome to stop buying the Indian purple. The Indian purple is the indigo-dyed muslin that is coming from Ter or Tagar via Paitan and Kalyana to the ports of Shuparaka, and then out from Sopara to Myos Hormos, and then from Myos Hormos to Alexandria, and then from Alexandria to Rome. Everything that leaves India becomes 10 times more expensive, if not more, by the time it arrives in Rome. Rome is bleeding sestertius. Indians are not buying Roman products in the same volume as the Romans. Let's call them Romans for argument's sake, are buying Indian products. There is a terrible imbalance of trade. India is sucking money out of Rome. And India is seeing an absolute heyday under the Satavahanas, remember? We kind of killed the golden goose. That's what it appears to be. Of course, there are other factors also, and there are local factors in Europe and what was happening in Europe at this time, plus what was happening to the Romans. Remember, the Romans had been, on the rise from the 6th century BC, 5th century BC onwards. And then you have imperial Rome and so on and so forth. So by the 4th century AD, Rome also was knackered completely. And then, barbarians at the gates and so on and so forth, and all of that. And of course, the very important shift of the Roman capital to Byzantine completely upset the entire apple cart. So this is a international phenomena that we have to look at, Ramesh. We cannot be satisfied with looking only to our shores as to what happened. And can you imagine what would happen to India if trade suddenly abruptly stopped because all hell was breaking loose on the other end? If the ships stopped coming, what would the traders do with all their goods piled up on the coast? Were there markets? Were there desperate new markets? What about the taxes that were owed? What about the wages that were owed? Where was all this going to come from? If suddenly your buyers had dried up, it would take just 2 or 3 years of, if you really want to be a cavalier about it, 5 years for the entire machinery to completely, totally, and irrevocably break down. If we were dependent on this trade for our existence. Oishi says, are the Kuda Caves also lesser caves? I'm not saying anything.
So there's one more question.
Yes,
same
please.
by Ramesh sir as well. So he says, do you not think there might have been an entourage of servants and artisans carrying or making red coarse ware alongside the people with the NBPW tableware?
Oh, most definitely. So if the traders were coming by sea, they were not, no trader was coming with a truck driver and nothing else. There would have been the entire, the whole business of business would have been coming along. So there would have been various underlings coming with all traders. Depending on the goods, there would have been soldiers to guard them, or guards, if you want to call it. The ships themselves would have carried a large complement of people. These ships would have needed repairing and things like this. They would have needed berthing facilities, which means automatically the port has a whole list of people that it needs to employ. Then you have all these sailors coming to shore. You have to keep them busy. So there will definitely be, various different facilities for the sailors, wine, women, song, all of that. So most definitely that will very much be part and parcel of the business. And it's very possible that traders would then set up their own shops over here permanently. So that, you could value add to the goods while waiting for the ships to come. So if the ships were coming on a more or less annual run, then you could amass all the goods in a warehouse and at the same time value add to those goods if you had to. So just for argument's sake, look at what happened to the Europeans. The European factories in Surat would buy cotton and turn it into yarn. And that way, there would be less space occupied by the cotton as it was shipped out to Europe. So similar things could be very, very, very easily be done. At Pompeii in 79 AD, we have a beautiful example of a bronze mirror handle that came from an Asian elephant. and most probably shipped out of a port on the west coast of India. We have a very similar one that was found at Ter. And at the bottom of that beautiful Lakshmi from Pompeii, as she's called, you have the alphabet L written in the Kharoshthi script. So telling you that the artisan was probably Gandhara who made that. And then you look at the Bagram ivories, and it's very obvious that that's where the inspired ivory craftsmen are coming from. But at the same time, you know that the ivory craftsmen of the Satavahana era are conducting carvings on the Sanchi memorials. So you're looking at people multi-purposing their skill sets and making donations left, right, and center. So I'm hoping that that beautiful coin that Dr. Bhandare has informed us about in a personal communication is published at some point. And if that is, then it will be the absolute final nail as far as I'm concerned, that there is zero doubt left for the world that Mandad Kuda is Mandagora. On that note, thank you very, very much for listening. If there are any questions, please forward them to me. I am at the rate Kurush Dalal on Instagram. I am also kurushdalal@gmail.com. And of course, at the rate INSTUCEN on Instagram. Do follow us so that you may keep abreast of the various programs and programming that we conduct. And thank you very much for being such a kind audience. And well, I look forward to seeing you all. Everybody is welcome at the excavations next year if they happen as visitors. Chat. Thank you,
sir.
Good night. Thank you, Riddhi, Dhruti, and Nudini. And of course, thank you to everybody in the back end at India Study Center, right from Dr. Karnik down to Saloni in the office, and Alan, of course, without whom we couldn't do all this, and Ramesh, without whom we, well, would flounder at ideas and ideation. So everybody here, Shweta and Yaneshwari and Aparna and Shashank with his beautiful posters and so on and so forth. So there's a huge team behind all of these efforts, ladies and gentlemen. I couldn't do this on my own.